Israel, Gog, Magog, New World Order, inflation, apostasy, global persecution. Let's start out with Israel. All right, Zechariah 12, verse 3. It will come upon in that day, I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All will lift it. It will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it.
Yeah, well, you see the same prophecy in Zechariah 14, verse 2, and you'll see the same thing in Joel 3, verse 2. And basically, those are prophecies about the whole world coming against Israel in the last days and dividing Israel's land. And those prophecies, indicate that all means all. A lot of people say, well, where is America in Bible prophecy? Well, there's where it is. It's one of the all that come against Israel in the last days. And so I found it very interesting that Biden is one of the few presidents now that's making a special trip to East Jerusalem. And the article that I gave you there from the Jerusalem Post says a visit would be viewed as a continued sign of continued support for the Palestinians in their illegitimate efforts to claim East Jerusalem. The article goes on and says this is seen as a nod in the U.S. acceptance of the Palestinian right to have their capital there. The very end of the article says quotes the former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, wrote in an open letter that such a visit would symbolize support for the Palestinian Authority's efforts to divide Jerusalem. So I think it's very interesting that as the world is sort of focused on Biden's, trip to Israel in general and the city of Jerusalem in particular, that he's actually making a trip, planning his stops in such a way that it recognizes the Palestinian, mindset to divide the city. And so when I see that kind of thing, I said, well, there's America coming against Israel and the city of Jerusalem right on schedule, just like Bible prophecy demands.
Absolutely. Zechariah 14, 2 through 3. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be captured, the houses plundered, the women ravished, and half the city exiled, but the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations when he fights on a day of battle. When is this supposed to have occurred, Dr. Woods, or will occur?
Well, I think that's the Battle of Armageddon that we read about in Revelation 16, about verses 12 through 16. But again, it's interesting because it says all the nations will come against Jerusalem. And if I'm understanding Bible prophecy correctly, and it brings me no gladness to announce this, but even the late great United States of America, if she's around when this happens, is going to join this configuration. And so you see that even as Biden is planning out his visitation in such a way that it buys into the Palestinian narrative.
Yeah. Let's skip to the point New World Order. Daniel 7:23. The four beasts will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. Talking about the New World Order. So other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth. So this fourth kingdom is the revived Roman Empire, correct? This one world governmental system.
Yeah, I think it's a empire arising out of the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome. That's not to neglect what Revelation 17 and 18 says, that it's going to be headquartered somewhere, in a literal city, the city of Babylon. But, these 10 horns, 10 toes arise out of the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome. And it basically is very clear there in that passage that this final form of Gentile rule prior to the return of Jesus at the end of the 7-year tribulation period will subdue the whole earth. So that's where I fit all of this discussion that's going on now about a new world order. Biden's surrogate, Brian Deese, responding. And the question from the CNN reporter is, how long do you think Americans are going to put up with this, the pain at the pump, so to speak? And his answer was, this is a quote, this is about the future. And then he says, liberal world order, and we have to stand firm. In other words, we don't care about the pain at the pump. What we care about is wealth redistribution throughout the globe. And it's very interesting as you advance the slides, you see that Biden, now this is a slide that goes back a ways towards the beginning of Biden's term, but it says Biden clears way for Russian pipeline after blocking Keystone Pipeline in the U.S. The title of the article is Obama Commits American Support to Brazilian Oil. So it says in that particular article from the New American, following the infamous British petroleum oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, the Obama administration took the opportunity to target oil companies and American workers by issuing a moratorium on offshore drilling, hurting American workers and costing American companies millions of dollars. Why then does the Obama administration desire to help Brazil expand its offshore drilling? So no offshore drilling for America, Obama said in 2011, but there is offshore drilling for Brazil. Here Biden comes along and says no pipeline, Keystone Pipeline for America, but we're going to help Russia with their pipeline. And that's what is bound up in that interview with Deese and the CNN reporter. When the CNN reporter asked, what about the pain at the pump? And the Biden surrogate Deese says, we don't care about pain at the pump. What we care about is the liberal New World Order. So my point is, America is being forced into this paradigm where wealth by the globalists is being redistributed. Decisions are made against America, but in favor of other countries, because the globalists have already made a decision that America is just too rich. So all of this is pushing us aggressively into the New World Order, which is not a big shock anymore, because Bible prophecy tells us that in the last days there will exist upon the earth, arising out of the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome, a new world order. And I remember when politicians wouldn't even use the expression, but now it's rolling right off their tongues. And that's what Deese said to CNN. And it shows me that they're very, very close to reaching their goal because they don't have anything to hide anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, and our next point will go to inflation. So we've gone from Israel to New World Order to inflation. Let's talk about inflation. The big news this week was massive spike in inflation. I can go to another article here that's from MSNBC, but you could of course find this anywhere, talking about the rise in inflation this week. And of course, we've been trying to tell people these numbers are still too low. They're much, much higher than this. They're lying to us because they're not using the numbers from the CPI. They've changed the numbers going back. And if they were to go and use the numbers that were in the early 80s, we would see that inflation is much, much, much higher than we're being told. You want to comment on this? Inflation rose 9.1% in June.
Yeah, I think people should keep in mind that this radical inflation that we're now seeing is the kind of thing that will exist in the tribulation period. So what is happening now, I think, is going to be exponentially replicated in the tribulation period. And we find that prophecy about inflation in the tribulation period in Revelation 6, verses 5 and 6. We believe we're not in the tribulation right now, but the kinds of things that are happening will exist in the tribulation period in a much grander way. And as we're struggling now with inflation, people need to understand that that is a biblically prophesied event. They'll find it there in Revelation 6, verses 5 and 6, which says, this is seal judgment number 3. It says, then he, that's Jesus, broke the third seal, and I heard the 4 living creatures say, come, and look, behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. Verse 6, I heard something like a voice in the center of the 4 living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm or damage the oil and the wine. And Brannon, if you advance the slides, you'll see a quote there from Charles Ryrie.
Yep.
Ryrie Study Bible, and he talks about what a denarius was in the time the Bible was written. He says a Roman silver coin that had a normal purchasing power of 10 quarts of wheat or 30 quarts of barley. So basically what has happened by the time you get to seal judgment number 3 is the value of the world's monetary supply has basically been reduced to 10% of its value. And so this is inflation. This is not just inflation that's described here. This is wild, hyper, radical inflation. And, today we're complaining about a number of, 9% inflation rate. Well, the Bible says it's actually going to get much worse, where the currencies of the world are going to be reduced to about 10% of their current purchasing power. And I don't think a prophecy like that can come into existence in a vacuum. The world stage has to be set for it. And that's my understanding of how the current inflationary pressures that we're now under fit into the pages of God's Word.
Let's look at this first 6 seals, Revelation 6. The first one is the advent of Antichrist, Revelation 6, verses 1 to 2. So the appearing of the Antichrist. Seal 2, verses 3 and 4 of chapter 6 of Revelation, war. Seal 3, verses 5 and 6 of Revelation chapter 6 is famine. Famine, folks. Is there talk about global famine? Seal 4, verses 7 and 8 speak of this, death. What kind of death? What are you thinking? Or is death from pandemic, plagues? What are we talking about here?
Well, first of all, when it talks about death in those verses, it specifically describes 25% of the world's population eliminated. Today everybody's all uptight about COVID, which accounts for less than a minutia of 1% death rate. Think of a quarter of the world's population being eradicated, and that's what happens by the time you get to seal judgment number 4. And I think the death is caused by what precedes it. What precedes seal judgment number 4 is seal judgment 2 and 3, which is war and famine. So the war and famine of seal judgment 2 and seal judgment number 3 are so severe that by the time you get to seal judgment number 4, 25% of the world's population is eliminated.
Wow. And then we got seal 5, which is verses 9 through 11 of Revelation 6, martyrdom. Christians being, I guess maybe then we would call them tribulation saints being murdered, right?
Yeah, you're right. This is not the church. The word church is not found once you get outside of Revelation chapter 3. This is talking about events that will transpire on the earth after the church is gone. And at the very end of that Word document I sent you, I talked about, there's an article there about a man, I think in Pakistan, who basically was in sort of a dispute with somebody, a customer. I guess he owned some kind of motorbike operation there in Pakistan. And this guy came into his store and demanded some kind of discount because he was Muslim. And the guy said, well, I'm sorry, I don't give discounts to people, just because they're Muslim. I, for one, am a Christian. And that got him reported to the authorities and arrested. And he's been away from his family for 5 years under Pakistan's blasphemy law. And now this article, that's the very end of the Word document I sent you, indicates that this man is now scheduled for, he's now been sentenced to death.
Wow.
So this is the kind of thing that's happening all over the world. Martyrdoms are not decreasing, they're increasing. And of course, these things are going to not slow down. They're going to accelerate, I believe. And they're going to reach their zenith in the tribulation period. So by the time you get to seal judgment number 5, the martyrs that are killed during that time period are portrayed as being under the altar and crying out to God for, justice or vengeance. And God tells them to wait a little while longer until their number is made complete. In other words, there's going to be more martyrdoms after that. And God will bring justice and judgment in his time period when he, at the end of this 7-year period, establishes his kingdom on the earth.
Seal number 6, Revelation 6, 12 through 17, cosmic disturbances.
Yeah, and this is where the pagans, beginning in verse 16, finally figure out that this has to be the hand of God. And the pagans or the unbelievers living on the earth say the great day of his wrath has come. But the way the Greek is set up there is the wrath of God doesn't start with steel judgment number 6, as many people falsely teach. It really backs up in the chapter all the way to the beginning. And the pagans are saying all of these things happening in rapid succession indicates that this is God's hand. And we see God's hand not just beginning the wrath with steel judgment number 5, but backing all the way up to steel judgment number 1. And part of the dawning of this perspective on the unbelievers is the fact that the heavens and the earth are being shaken to the point where the cosmos are being disturbed. And, Jesus talked about that in Matthew 24, about verses 27, 28, 29. Right in there, he talked about perplexity among the nations, and he talked about the basically interstellar activity.
Wow.
Even the interstellar orbit that God has established is going to be shaken during this terrible time period. Well, in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 3 and 4, among that passage, among many other passages, boldly predicts that as the church age winds to its conclusion, and we think that the rapture of the church, is what ends the church age. As the church age winds to its conclusion, the church of Jesus Christ will gradually wander off the pathway of truth. That's why Paul warns in 2 Timothy 4, 3 and 4, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance to their own desires, and turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. Now, this is not a prediction about the unsaved world. The unsaved world has always been this way. This is basically a prediction about the church, because this is a pastoral letter. Paul writing to Timothy, a pastor, and he's describing the conditions of the church in the last days. And the church would basically depart from previously known truth. And my goodness, we certainly see that happening all around us, don't we?
Yeah, we do. Let's talk about the World Economic Forum for a minute. What are your thoughts about the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab?
Well, I think there has always been a plan in the minds of unsaved people to bring about a new world order, a one world system of economics, politics, and religion that excludes God. This is not a new idea. It's an idea that goes all the way back to the plains of Shinar with the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. Lost man has always felt that, one world government is the way to solve our problems. And so there have been many within history that have pushed for this one world government. We can think of the, different groups, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. And so this WEF, or this World Economic Forum, is sort of the latest group to push for this idea very boldly and aggressively. And today it goes by the name the Great Global Reset.
Do you think the World Economic Forum, when they say that by 2030 you'll own nothing and be happy, and merging big government and big business together, promoting Hatari, who says we don't need to worry about the God above the clouds, but the God in the clouds, meaning the elite. We will be the creators. We will be the intelligent designers. This is Hatari, who works so closely with Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab has supposedly been mentored by Henry Kissinger. He was for funding abortion all over the globe. Do you think the World Economic Forum is a demonic organization, a satanic organization? You think it's doing the work of Satan and setting the foundation for the Antichrist?
Well, I think they're right. 50% of it. They said we'll own nothing and be happy. So I think we'll own nothing if we're still here, but we won't be very happy. So they're about 50% right. But prophecy is such that it can't materialize in a vacuum. The stage has to be set. Even the prophecies related to Christ's first coming, the stage was being set centuries in advance. And so that's how I would factor in this whole World Economic Forum. It's Satan moving the chess pieces around for his final match. Paul, all the way back in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 7, said the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. And that was 2,000 years ago. And 1 John chapter 4 and verse 3 says the spirit of the Antichrist is already in the world. And so, yes, all of these groups, the WEF being the latest, are basically satanically manipulated institutions, sort of paving the way for Satan's final masterpiece and project, a restoration of Genesis 11.
So you're not encouraged by the work of Klaus Schwab?
No.
I believe Dr. Woods, the World Economic Forum, is indeed preparing the way for the Antichrist. I had on Dr. Rob Lindstedt the other day, and he was saying the Great Reset is all about preparing the world for the Antichrist, a one-world economy, a one-world government, one-world religion. The World Economic Forum is pushing digital currency. We've explained and documented this from their own website. They're pushing the idea of no privacy. You'll have to have a digital ID to get on the internet, to vote, to do anything. They're pushing the idea of hacking the human brain. They become the creators. It's transhumanism, technocracy. It's about as demonic as you could get in modern times. And I was just told, literally, as we were going on the air by a retired military officer, that Billy Graham's daughter, Anne Graham Lotz, has been endorsing since at least 2011 the World Economic Forum. I've never been a real big fan of hers. Something just didn't set right with me. But anyway, so I've pretty much ignored her. She's just not someone I follow, and really, like I said, it's something that just didn't fit right with me. But anyway, sure enough, I went to her website, annegrahamlotz.org, put in her name, put in World Economic Forum in the search engine, and I found this. I knew my participation at the World Economic Forum would be challenging physically, mentally, and spiritually, and it was. Approximately 2,000 world leaders gathered in a small Swiss skiing village for their annual meeting at the end of January to network and help guide the world to a better place. While I attended 5 years ago, I have not been able to arrange my schedule to return until this year. When I did, I was very encouraged to discover that the founder and director, Professor Klaus Schwab, publicly acknowledged that answers to the problems the world is facing politically and economically will come from what he describes as the faith community, end quote. While I know at Davos the faith community includes Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists, Professor Schwab went on out of his way to draw in evangelical Christians such as myself. Yeah, you're being used as a useful idiot, woman. To draw in evangelical Christians such as myself and to make us feel welcome. And I saw Jesus in righteousness and justice, shaking the world's business and economic leaders by exposing the greed and self-serving interests that have dominated policies for decades. As a result, many leaders now seem open to the need for shared values. What shared values? How do you have shared values, Anne? How do you have shared values with these people that are Antichrist figures, preparing the way for the Antichrist? 2 Corinthians 6:14-17 says you can't do it. Revelation 18 says, come out of this system, be separate. Sorry, Anne, there are no shared values, but whatever. And we're looking for answers beyond the traditional bastion of power and conventional wisdom. Could God be allowing the world to face problems that seem to have no human solution so that its leaders will look up? God will give them wisdom, insight, and solutions that are beyond their considerable intellectual knowledge and experience if they will turn to him. But here we have Professor Schwab. She says she discovered that founder and director Professor Klaus Schwab publicly acknowledged that answers to the problems we're facing politically and economically will come from what he describes as the faith community. And she says, I was very encouraged to discover that, he was doing this. You want to comment before I go to another slide of hers?
Well, I would just say, shame on her, first of all. I think she knows better than that. Globalist forces have always wanted to co-opt religion and use all vestiges of religion, including evangelical Christianity, as sort of a useful idiot to promote their agenda. And here the World Economic Forum is doing this identical thing with Anne Graham Lotz. So she needs to publicly recant. Any ministry that's platformed her or brought her in to teach Bible prophecy needs to publicly repent, because this is just unconscionable.